Welcome to the Unlist. Today we are doing a video in celebration of House Guerlain. Now this is not a proper Guerlain house video. This is celebration of the house for the month of April. In the same way, we did a celebration of Chanel in January, what we call Shanuary on Basenotes. We are also having a month-long celebration in April of House Guerlain, which we call Guerlapril. Now, the Guerlapril portmanteau makes more sense if you use the French-Canadian pronunciation of Guerlain, which is more like Guerlain, because Guerlain and April kind of mesh together better. Also, Creole French in Louisiana, and I believe Haitian French as well sits a little closer to that. But actual proper Parisian French, which Guerlain is a Parisian brand, therefore you think they would use Parisian French anyway. They would pronounce it as Guerlain, like that. So the portmanteau only works if you use a different dialect of French. In the same way how a lot of American words, a lot of American puns only make sense when you use American pronunciations. You switch over to English pronunciation or Australian or New Zealand pronunciation and those puns don't make sense anymore. So you have to stretch things a bit here, but I think most of you out there get what Guerlapril is trying to accomplish. Anyhow, month-long celebration of the house means I'm not going to try and make a comprehensive historical video on the house. I would need 2 videos for that anyway. This is just me naming some of my favorite Guerlain fragrances. So this is technically also an unlist video where I get to unlist my favorite Guerlain fragrances in celebration of the house itself. Similar manner to what I did with my Shanuary video. Now, kicking things off, for me, despite their best intentions, I don't feel like Guerlain has a single house style. And that is the problem when you have a house as old as Guerlain is. Similar to Avon. Avon is a multi-headed hydra. They have different eras where you can tell all the fragrances made within that given era, regardless of who the perfumer was, all have a similar vibe to them. Similar situation with houses like Guerlain, and they had 4 house perfumers from the original family before they were bought by LVMH and began just using industry perfumers. So not very many perfumes survive from the first 2 house perfumers, unfortunately, due to the passage of time and the scarcity of materials, record keeping not being so great, and on top of that, just in general, brands not being able to produce things that don't sell well means a lot of the Guerlain fragrances from the original Pierre Pascal era and then of course the subsequent Amy Guerlain era, a lot of those fragrances are lost to history. Maybe the house has those fragrances or the formulas for them in a vault somewhere, I don't know, but I can't speak much on those eras outside of, Clone du Imperial and Jicky, things like that. But outside of that stuff, not really much I can say about them. Although the Jacques Guerlain era still has a lot of representation in their current day catalog. And the Jean-Paul Guerlain era also has a lot of representation in their catalog. Now, it was Jean-Paul that actually sold the house to LVMH, so a lot of Guerlain family members are still very sore at him. And these days, he's really on in age, and some state that he even has like dementia or something, so he may not even be in a state of mind to know what's going on with his brand anymore. But he was officially ousted as perfumer a few years back when he made some controversial remarks that were deemed racist, and I heard those remarks, and I tend to side with the oustering. As great of a perfumer as you can be, artistic and all that, yeah, if you're a bigot, then that's not really a good look for the house that bears your name. So under the rug you go. Your creations may carry on, obviously. You can separate the art from the artist. That's why we still wear stuff like Samsara today. But once he made those remarks, he was gone. Although, to be truthful, he had stopped being the primary perfumer even when he was still on board, just because after he sold Guerlain to LVMH, he was ostensibly replaced for the mainline fragrances with the industry perfumers who would do stuff that became more mainstream for the house, while Jean-Paul continued to create for Guerlain, but all of his creations were mostly just limited releases, special collections, reissues of older stuff that his older family worked on. You know, Jean-Paul really had the role that Thierry Vassa has now. Thierry Vassa was his real replacement in the 2000s, made all the mainline fragrances for the brand, and Jean-Paul did all the historical stuff, all the weird stuff. Then once Thierry Vassa got a little on in years, he was given Jean-Paul's role, right? He was made the curator of the house, the older fragrances, the special niche collections, while Delphine Jelk was promoted up to do their mainstream stuff. Of course, there are rumors in the grapevine that Patricia Nicolai was once going to be considered as replacement for Jean-Paul Guerlain, but she follows the matriarchal family line, not the patriarchal one. And because this stupid thing about Guerlain being a patriarchal house, it has to pass from male to male, that automatically invalidated her because she didn't carry the Guerlain name, being as she was along the matron line, not the patriarchal line. I think it's stupid. She clearly has their blood in her veins. She's clearly in the family, and she clearly has talent, and she has skill. She could have been the house perfumer, and you can imagine all the things like New York being a Guerlain perfume instead of being of her own house. She's done well enough on her own, though. Clearly, her fragrances stand shoulders above many others, but that's just something that gets kicked around a lot. Even Luca Turin made some mention of that a few years back, about how she really should have been the next Guerlain perfumer, and they kind of gave her the rub, which would, is why she has her own brand now. Anyway, on to my favorites. Well, like I said, different eras. Each of them have their own vibe. Obviously, I don't really have anything in the Pierre Pascal or the Aime Guerlain era that I can say is a favorite, aside from Jicky. I mean, everyone loves Jicky, though. Saying that Jicky is one of my favorite Guerlains is just like saying M&M's are one of my favorite candy-coated chocolates. It just seems a little bit on the nose, like it'd be expected. I do love Jicky a lot, though. And most folks who have an appreciation for classic perfume do end up liking Jicky. It's one of the earliest abstract fragrances. It's actually considered the first truly abstract perfume. It's not hygienic, wasn't a cologne, had some kind of purpose. It was strictly scent for the sake of being scent. And that was the first, if not one of the first, such fragrances that was purposeless, really. Just wearable fragrance art, right? Jicky was considered the first of that. It's also one of the earlier fougere structure fragrances, based around tonka and oak moss, lavender, bergamot. Now, Jicky is strange in that it doesn't really have heart notes. And Raja Dove, whether you love him or not, had a good thing to say about Jicky. Raja Dove made a comment that it's like the Eiffel Tower, that you get a couple of top notes that are really present, really strong in the opening of Jicky, then it goes poof and collapses into this massive base of all these materials. So it's not built with a typical pyramid like a modern fragrance where the materials are meant to burn off at a different rate, so you proceed down through a development. It just goes top notes and then dry down. That's it. That's where it goes. And, that makes it a bit oppressive for some people, because you get this top notes, the bergamot, right? And then it just goes boom, patchouli, civet, lavender, tonka, all these things all hitting your face at one time. Dosed, I guess, almost equally to each other. Then move on a little further into the Jacques Guerlain era. And a lot of people are going to be like, yeah, Shalimar, yeah, Le Herb Bleu, yeah, Opera's Landais, yeah, Mitsoko. Those are all great, all right. I have Shalimar. It's good, obviously. But in my opinion, my favorite fragrance of that particular era my favorite fragrance of the Jacques Guerlain era is going to be Vol de Nuit. Not a lot of people are going to say that, so I feel like I'm in a bit of a minority stating that Vol de Nuit is my favorite from the era. And I say that because it really laid down the foundation for the castoreum-based leather fragrances that have a cooler, slightly more powdery metallic style. Yeah, Nietzsche 10 was really the forebearer of that with the aldehydes and the pyrrolone, and it also had a powdery element to it as well. But the sheer abstraction of Vol de Nuit is designed to smell like cold air going over aluminum wings, because Vol de Nuit means night flight in French. It's based around a book. So it's supposed to smell like it sounds. And this cold, aloof, sort of serious leather scent, floral leather scent, really conveys that mental imagery. And it's crazy because that kind of avant-garde perfumery is still considered cool in 2024. Like, we have houses out there now doing stuff like Ganymede, right? And these are really abstract perfumes. MFK has a lot of perfumes like this. But we can go all the way back to the 30s and see Jacques Guerlain doing this kind of perfumery with those materials almost a century ago. And that is a big deal. Now, special shout out to Mouchoir de Monsieur. Not one of my favorites, but Mouchoir de Monsieur is definitely one to own for me. It is kind of the male market flip side to the Jicky coin. Although Jicky was never gendered to begin with. Jicky was just one of those perfumes that was perfume. It was released to be worn by whoever. Dandies wore it. Women wore it. Didn't really matter. But there were still some stubborn holdouts who were not secure in their masculinity, and they needed to have their hand held, and it had a perfume be like, this is for men. And unfortunately, Jacques Guerlain had a friend who was like that. Didn't want to wear Jicky because his bride-to-be wore Jicky. So he did a little modification and pared back the spices, increased the lavender, increased the tonka, increased the musk, brought it forward into more of a foppish sort of dandy countenance, made it a really more of a gentleman's handkerchief fragrance, hence the name Mouchoir de Monsieur, which just means handkerchief of gentleman. Now, when you smell it side by side with Jicky, you can see the changes. But when you just wear the fragrance by itself, when you just smell it in isolation and then wait a day and then smell Jicky, you can't tell them apart. In the air, they smell the same. It's only when you A/B test them that they really show the differences. So they're almost the same fragrance, but like flankers, or like how you've got Terre de Hermès and Terre de Hermès Parfum, very similar, subtle differences. It's the same thing. Mouchoir de Monsieur is more similar than different from Jicky, and that is probably why it's discontinued now, since its whole reason to exist has been nullified by the passage of time. Since men no longer want to smell like Mouchoir de Monsieur, any man who wants to smell like that at all will just make do with Jicky, because now we're talking a century and a half removed almost from that period. So the point is now rendered moot. Thus, the very existence of Mouchoir de Monsieur was rendered moot. That, and as you know, Guerlain began to finally make true men's market releases into the mid-century. Vetiver in 61, Abbey Rouge in 65. So they looked back at Mouchoir de Monsieur and said, yeah, we don't need that anymore. Right? That's unnecessary. It was discontinued, brought back, discontinued, brought back again, discontinued. It's always had a bit of a tumultuous existence. The original batches of Mouchoir de Monsieur were not even sold in bottles. You had to get Lalique bottles and get them filled, right? You had to ask for it at the counter. It wasn't available prepackaged. Now, moving on up forward, of course, I already mentioned Vetiver, one of my favorites too. It is the reference Vetiver. It's not the first. Clearly, Carvin and Givenchy released Vetivers before Guerlain did, but Guerlain made the one that has really become standard. I mean, this stuff is so successful. It's had flankers that have been discontinued. Now it's got eau de parfum and parfum concentrations most recently. So the stuff just keeps carrying on because it really is the flag bearer for the Vetiver style. Abbé Rouge is a little less timeless. Abbé Rouge is very much of its time. It's got the classic Guerlinade formula in it, so it's got that bit of like a baked cookie vanilla spice going on. Now, Guerlinade, for those of you who don't know, Guerlinade is a whole perfume unto itself, and it was released in the 20s. At some point, Jacques Guerlain decided to take the entire perfume of Guerlinade and place it within other perfumes to make it a bit of a calling card, so people could recognize a fragrance and go, that's a Guerlain fragrance, because they'd smell a bit of the Guerlinade in it. You can't get Guerlinade separately now. Obviously, it hasn't been available for a very, very long time. And the more modern Guerlains don't have it. So most of the things created by Thierry Vassa, the things created by Delphine Jelk, a lot of these niche lines, art and material lines, you know, Absolute Orient lines, they don't contain Guerlinade. It's really just the classics that do. I would be hard-pressed to see Guerlinade in anything like Bois de Mysterio or whatever, but who knows? It could be in there. I just can't perceive it with my own nose. Speaking of that, once we move through Abbé Rouge, I think a really underappreciated scent is Eau de Guerlain from '74. And now, Guerlain as a house is not very keen on making fougères. Mouchoir de Monsieur being one of the only proper fougères aside from Jicky, which some say is not a fougère, it's more of an abstract. Eau de Guerlain is also not a fougère. It's just a fresh floral sheep with Hedioned. It's more or less the acknowledgement of Eau Sauvage by Jean-Paul Guerlain. Loved Eau Sauvage. Wanted to do his own take on it. Better version. More floral, more French, more fancy. More green notes, more oak moss. So it's a bit more gussied up than the futuristic Eau Sauvage is. But it's a similar jasmine forward sort of citric, floral, herbal kind of a thing, right? With a chypre, sheep dry down. Now, since I said Mitsoku and Shalimar are not my favorites, some other later creations by Jean-Paul are on the women's market side of things. Chamade is one that I reach back for a little bit. I love Black Currant. And Chamade is almost entirely about black currant. So therefore, Chamade is one I go to. It's a very green, black currant focused fragrance with a floral heart. Again, with the chypre dry down, a little bit of the Guerlinade in there. Chant d'Arôme is another one that I like. It's another green sheep, but it's more of a white floral fragrance, whereas Chamade is definitely living in the rose, living in the black currant bud. Chant d'Arôme is a little bit older, made in '62 as opposed to '69. And Chant d'Arôme is really more like a soapy, white floral, green fragrance. It's got a very subtle way about it. It's not a real heavy scent. The oak moss base can get a bit chewy, but it's not, I wouldn't call it a green fragrance in the way that Number 19 or Givenchy Trois would be. But it's definitely heading towards that vibe. Chamade is actually more green than Chant d'Arôme is. Both of those are very nice to me. I like them both. Alongside Val de Nuit, those three are among my favorites of that particular period. The Jacques Guerlain moving into the Jean-Paul. Now, I do like some of the other stuff. Nahima is nice. Jardins de Bagatelle is also nice. Haven't smelled Mayhora, haven't smelled Perreur. Those things were gone from the catalog before I ever got my nose on them. Soulevant was also gone, could never try it. Obviously, the big unicorns like Jetty, I will never probably be able to smell in my wildest dreams. So I'm sorry, those of you hardcore Guerlainophiles out there who want me to do a video about Jetty or something, I can't. Even a sample of Jetty is like $1,000, so I can't even touch that stuff. Unless one of you rich sugar daddies or sugar mamas out there wants to slide me a sample of Jetty to write a review on, then it's never going to cross my desk, not in a million years. Now we move into the more recent eras. Derby surprisingly doesn't make my list. And it's not because I'm jealous over how rare and expensive it is. Some of you real deep vintage weirdos out there equate rarity to, quality of fragrance. You're like, yeah, Derby is the peak. Nothing's better than Derby. And it's like, yeah, well, you're going to say that if you spend $1,000 on it, right? For one of those old Eagle bottles or something. You're going to spend a big sum of money. You're going to talk yourself up into worshiping it because you got to justify what you just lost. The kidney you just lost for that. But fortunately for me, I've had several samples of Derby from different periods. I've had the Parisienne bottle sample from that bottle. I've had the older deep vintage sample bottle from the not the Eagle bottle, but I've had from the older Listerine bottle, so 90s, I guess. So I've smelled plenty of Derby, and I can appreciate Derby, but Derby to me just feels like a beefed up Val de Nuit. It's Val de Nuit, that same Castoreum-based, powdery leather accord, but all the coolness is gone. All the white floral facets are gone, and it feels like basically Jean-Paul said, okay, we need to compete with Chanel and Antaeus. Let's take Val de Nuit and make Val de Nuit smell more like Antaeus. Can we do that? Okay, cool. That's Derby. You can throw tomatoes at me all you want. You can skewer me, light me on fire, crucify me, whatever you want. But Derby will always be Guerlain's response to Antaeus. That's what it is to me. It's what it will always be. And if I could get a bottle for like $100, like Antaeus is like $120 now. If I can get a bottle of Derby for $100, sure, I would definitely own one. But it's not worth much more than that to me. So, sorry, not sorry. Heritage, however, is good stuff. That one makes my list. Heritage is very good. I like the smell of Heritage. It's the one true proper fougere that the house actually has, aside from Mouchoir de Monsieur. Heritage was their one stab at the fougere genre, and they knocked it out of the park, as you might suspect. Aldehydes, sandalwood, bergamot, lavender, woody notes, just supreme all the way around. It was Jean-Paul who doesn't like fougères. He stated himself that he thinks fougères smell like a truck stop. But he kind of went, you know what? People like fougères. Let's make a fougere. Thus, Heritage was born. Then once you move past the Jean-Paul era into the more recent years with different perfumers, whether it's Thierry Vassa or Delphine Jelk or someone else. I like some of that stuff too. I mean, L'Instant de Guerlain is lovely. I'm a fan of that. I've got a bottle of that. Guerlain Homme is also nice. If you like your mojito type of alcoholic drink type of fragrances, it's also nice. I like some of the collection stuff. I like Oud Essential. I like Patchouli Ardent. I like that stuff too. Coriolan, which was one of the last Jean-Pauls to come out in the late 90s. Coriolan, really weird bottle. Also a nice fragrance. But, more modern Guerlains, to me, just don't feel like Guerlain. They feel like any other niche house that you could find. And it's hit or miss. And like I said, when you find an Oud Essential, which is good, or you find a Patchouli Ardent, which is good, you've got 1,000 other Aqua Allegoria fragrances that are all garbage, right? That just sort of drag it down. So it's a bit of a, it's a bit of a crapshoot with modern day Guerlain. So those are my favorites. Hope you enjoyed watching this. I'll do a proper history video on this house eventually, so stay tuned for that. And thanks for watching, and go on Basenotes, celebrate Guerlapril with us. Catch you next time.